we know the neocons and new liberals are together in this fight against Russia, in this hate against Russia. Why they're hating Russia so much that makes them capable of doing each and everything possible to harm Russia?
Well, let's put it this way. First of all, they don't hate Russia because you can't say you hate Russia if you don't know Russia, right? Let's say you're the symbol of Brazil right now, you, all right? And I have a policy in Brazil I want to accomplish, but you're in the way. So I'm going to say that you're a murderer. I'm going to say that you're a rapist. I'm going to say that you have written books advocating the torture of puppies. I'm going to say you're the most evil person in the world. And people are going to say, my God, Scott, you hate him. No, because everything I just said about you isn't true. If it was true, then I could hate you. But it's not true. I don't hate you, but I am using you to create a symbol that can be hated. And I'm exploiting the ignorance of people by saying things about you that they are willing to accept at face value without question. So therefore, you become something else in the minds of others. But you're not deserving of this hate because none of what I just said about you is true. It's all false. That's what's happening with Russia. We have what I call the Putin whisperers. You see, there's a class of people. We used to have genuine Russian experts, called them Soviet experts back then. But people who studied the Soviet Union, studied Russia linguistically, culturally, historically, not for the purpose of falling in love with Russia, actually for the purpose of going to war with Russia. But, the old adage, know your enemy as you know yourself. It means to be honest, to know your enemy honestly, to know them as they truly are. It took a lot of time. It took a lot of effort. I was one of those people. I didn't get the benefit of the decades of experience that some of my mentors did. But I was trained as to understand Russia, not to hate Russia, to understand Russia, understand the Soviet Union, not to hate the Soviet Union. All this training was done in preparation for war, so I would have to kill these people. But I wasn't doing it based upon ignorance. I was doing it based upon a legitimate, detailed knowledge and understanding of the enemy. Then what happened is we transitioned into better relations through arms control. This knowledge and understanding enabled us to make that transition. You see, I didn't have to learn not to hate Russians because I already knew the Russians and I didn't hate the Russians. I just simply had to adapt to a new reality that said they're not my enemy. So I take the knowledge, the truth-based knowledge that I have about this problem set, and now I apply it to a new mission, which is peace, peaceful coexistence, disarmament. And it wasn't a difficult transition to make. I mean, emotionally it was difficult because to go from enemy to friend is an emotional thing. But from a pure factual base, it wasn't hard. There was no inconsistency in my fact set because this fact set readily transferred over here because it's the truth. But then the Soviet Union collapsed and we had to transition now from a nation that we were having peaceful coexistence with to a new mindset, a defeated enemy. Now, making that transition was almost impossible unless you redefined the fact set. And that's what a lot of people did. They said, this is no longer the Soviet Union. So all you Soviet guys, I remember I applied in 1992. I did an interview with the CIA at the invitation of a senior CIA person. He said, why don't you come back and work with us on Russia? So I went up and I did an interview, and I was interviewed by the head of the new, they called it Oreo at that time, Office of Russian East European Affairs, or something like that. And he basically said, your experience is no good to us. You're tainted. You're a Soviet guy. You have that old thinking. We need new thinking. I'm like, but the fact set hasn't changed. The fact set is the same. What do you need? You need a new way of thinking. What does that mean? And what that means is they need people who will view Russia as a defeated enemy, people who aren't looking to peacefully coexist with Russia, but people who are looking to economically and politically exploit Russia. You see, the policy wasn't to live in peace. The policy was to destroy Russia, to dismember Russia, to cause it to collapse in upon itself. And this required the need to jettison the old hands and bring in new people like Michael McFaul. Michael McFaul is not a Russian expert. He's not, simply not. He's ignorant as the day is long about Russia. Michael McFaul is a Russian exploiter. He cut his teeth on, the early Yeltsin years. He was one of the people that worked with the National Endowment for Democracy and other entities to breathe life into the viability of Yeltsin, to create the myth of Boris Yeltsin, which was little more than a vehicle for American control of Russia. And he was one of the people that sought to politically dominate and economically exploit Russia. He's an enemy of Russia who calls himself a Russian expert. The same thing is with this whole cast of characters that we call, Russian experts. I call them Putin whisperers. People like Fiona Hill, with her quaint little British accent, looking harmless because the second Americans hear a British accent, they melt and think that automatically it translates into she must be intellectually sound. She's not intellectually sound. What she is a fake, a fraud. She's somebody who wrote a PhD thesis about Vladimir Putin and autocracy and dictatorship. Vladimir Putin is not an autocrat. He is not a dictator. What he is a completely different kind of Russian leader than Boris Yeltsin was. He's a Russian leader who isn't willing to allow his country to be exploited attacked and demolished by outside powers. He's a Russian leader that believes that Russia should stand on its own 2 feet and move forward. Is he perfect? No. Is everything he does, wonderful? No. But he's a million times better than Boris Yeltsin was. And what the United States wants to do is get rid of Vladimir Putin, who's very inconvenient to us, and replace him with a new Boris Yeltsin. In order to do that, we can't talk about the reality of Russia. I mean, most Americans, and today, we live in a nation that's undergoing its own economic difficulties. You don't have to travel too far away from where I live to find the Rust Belt, the old cities and towns that thrived during the age of industrialization, but have now suffered. Factories have closed down, businesses have shuttered, entire parts of the town is comprised of decaying homes where nobody lives and nobody will live. Reduced tax bases, which means reduced services. We've got problems here. If we did an experiment in the Rust Belt and we went back to say, let's pick 1999, and it had an American stand in front of one part of the city and took that picture, and then took that same picture, 2000, 2001, 2023. And then we did those, that card trick where you take images like we did as kids, where you draw stick figures that are running, and you go, and it looks like they're moving. Do that, and you'll see the American city or town decaying before your eyes, rotting away. Now let's do the same experiment to a Russian city. Start 1999. Anyone, pick them. I don't care which one. Do the same thing. You're going to see a city coming to life, being rebuilt, invigorated, modernized. Vladimir Putin has done wonderful things for Russia. Whether you like him or you hate him, you got to admit this. You got to at least be truthful about it. But we don't want to have that conversation in America, because most Americans would went, well, I like that kind of leader. Why don't we have that kind of leadership? What we have to do is attack Vladimir Putin. We have to attack the Russian nation. We can't talk about the reality of Russia. We can't talk about the complexity of Russia. We can't talk about the fact that it's the largest landmass country in the world. Therefore, multiple time zones, and the governing something of this expanse is complicated. So, the notion of a singular figure dictating everything is absurd. Russia's broken down into districts that have governors. The governors have a lot of power, and the governors further delegate that responsibility to, city mayors. Mayors have a lot of power. Decisions in Russia are made from the ground up. The up part, Vladimir Putin provides directives, a notion of the direction they want to head, but Most of the time, those directives and the notion of the direction what they have come from discussions he's had with the governors and the mayors about what their needs are, what their wants are, what their capabilities are. And so a good leader listens to that and then comes up with a plan that they support and they move forward. But we can't talk about that because that's too hard. There's an old saying, when you're explaining, you're losing. And so anybody who wants to promote a policy of confronting Russia, but then has to explain why that's a good policy in the face of the reality of Russia is going to lose. So no, we reinvent a Russia, just like I reinvented you when I said I want to attack you. I tell a story that has nothing to do with the truth. I come up with stories that are just manufactured out of thin air, stories that are designed to make people afraid, fear. Ignorance is the worst thing because from ignorance comes fear, and that fear can be exploited by people. So we've turned Vladimir Putin into the personification of evil. We've turned Russia into a nation of robots, people without a heart, without a soul, who blindly obey their leader, without any notion of the consequences of their actions. That's just not Russia. But the people today who are advising President Biden, who advise President Trump, who advise President Obama, who advise the next president, they're not Russian experts. They're the most dishonest class of academics America has ever known. They're people who promote hatred through ignorance. And if you call yourself an academic, if you're somebody who believes that knowledge is power, and you turn around and use that platform to exploit ignorance through misinformation to generate fear for political purposes, you deserve to be fired on the spot.
Obama's head director of national intelligence, his name was James Clapper. Now, he was an old Air Force general. He knew about the Russians. After he left office, he was interviewed and he says, I know the history of the Russians. They're almost genetically driven to be deceitful, to co-opt, to do evil things. This is a known characteristic, almost genetic, in the Russian people. This is the guy in charge of all the intelligence agencies in the U.S. government? Did he really believe that? He's not the sharpest knife in the drawer, as we usually say. But it's hard to believe that he really believes the Russians are genetically driven to do these things. So this is what, here I am, trying to put my feet in Putin's shoes, right? And I say, my God, who's running this show? Who's telling Blinken and Sullivan and the others what to do? Why is this guy General Petraeus, who lost in Iraq, who lost in Afghanistan, who knows nothing about Vietnam because just a little boy, who's listening? Why do they listen to him still? Well, because there's a lot of money in the military, industrial, congressional, intelligence, media, academia, think tank complex. Mickey Man. Now, I'll say one more thing on this. I'm a Catholic, and I like Pope Francis. I don't share everything he believes, but sometimes he hits the nail right on the head. So here he is in 2015, I think it was. He appears before a joint committee of the U.S. Congress, the joint Congress, both of the House of Representatives and the Senate. And he gets up and he makes a pretty good speech, in the midst of which he says, quote, the main problem is the blood-drenched alms traders, period, end quote. Well, yay! The Congress people in the Senate, oh, yeah. And then they look in their pockets to see if the latest envelope from Lockheed or from Raytheon or from Boeing didn't slip out of their pockets while they were clapping. It was giving hypocrisy a bad name, for God's sake. All these people who profiteer on the profiteering on war were applauding the Pope for naming the problem, which is the blood-drenched arms traders. He had it right. Now, how can we do this? Well, it takes an informed citizenry, as Eisenhower warned. And so we're trying to chip away and say to the American people, look, you've been sold down the road so many times. There were no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There were all kinds of lies told about not only Afghanistan, not only Iraq, but also Libya. And when are you going to grow up? When are you going to give a good example to the Europeans and say, look, we're up to here with this stuff. We want the truth. And we retired people who used to be able to tell the truth when we were in active service. We stand ready to help, and we keep producing things so that people can have a place to go to learn the truth.